Hey, Andrew.
Yes, ma'am.
You wrote the book, Strong Inside, Perry Wallace and the Collision of Race and Sports in the South. How did you learn about Perry Wallace? What brought him to your attention?
So, I came to school here in Nashville at Vanderbilt from Austin, Texas. I had gone to high school there, and I was the sports editor of our high school newspaper and played baseball there. And one day I was walking down the hall of my high school, and there was a poster advertising a sports writing scholarship to Vanderbilt that was named after Gerold Oliver, the old famous sports writer from the early 1900s. I applied for it. One day my mom showed up at school a couple months later crying. I didn't know why she was at my school, and my daughter now talks about happy tears. And so she was there to say, Vanderbilt called, you won the scholarship. So I come to this community thinking about sports writing. It's what brought me to college. I was a history major. My sophomore year, I was taking a Black history course taught by Dr. Yolette Jones, and it's coincidentally the same year that Perry Wallace was invited back to Vanderbilt for the first time in almost 20 years since he had graduated to be honored as essentially the Jackie Robinson of the Southeastern Conference. And so I read an article about Perry's experience. I'd never heard of him before, not having grown up here. And I asked Dr. Jones if I could write a paper about Perry for her class. And I was really concerned that she was going to say no, that we don't write about basketball in college. We don't write about basketball players. That's not a serious enough topic. But thankfully she said, go for it. And so I called Perry from my dormitory. He was a professor, the first Black tenured law professor at the University of Baltimore at that time. And I wrote a paper about him when I was 19 years old. And that paper stayed on my mind as the most interesting thing that I had done in college for years. And so 17 years later, I met Betsy Phillips, who's in the audience, and others at Vanderbilt University Press. And I emailed Perry and I said, hey, do you remember me? I was a kid who wrote a paper about you a long time ago. I'd like to write a biography about you. And he said, go for it. And so I got started. I spent 8 years working on the book on the side of a regular job, 4 years of research and 4 years of writing. But it was that experience really of talking to Perry as a teenager and writing that school paper that eventually led to the book.
So how did his narrative impact
Oh gosh. Perry has had more impact on me than I would say anybody in my life, except for my parents in my life. He was a combination of father figure, older brother figure, a professor figure, best friend figure. One of the good things about having it take 8 long years to write the book is that I got to know him better and better and better over those 8 years. And I remember traveling to... Yeah, you were one of the first people I interviewed for the book at the library, where we sat down and talked about your experience at Pearl High School. And I actually have that written. I need to donate to the Pearl archives. Perry gave it to me as he was passing away. So, but Perry was such an important figure, not just in sports, but since we're talking about civil rights, a legitimate civil rights figure. So many of the moments of his life track so neatly with important moments and places in the civil rights movement. He started elementary school in 1954. Not that he was going to a desegregated school, but the year of Brown, he's walking downtown as a 12-year-old kid. Saw a picture of Walgreens earlier. He went down to Fifth Avenue and was watching sit-ins. He said he wanted to see history being made with his own eyes. His recruitment to Vanderbilt was really partly a result of Vanderbilt's reaction to those sit-ins, with Reverend Lawson being expelled from the university. When a new chancellor came in, Alexander Hurd, who was a more progressive figure in the 60s, he felt like, for better or worse, people pay attention to sports, and that he could send a signal around the country that Vanderbilt was opening up and changing if they did something in the sports arena. And so he encouraged the coach, Roy Skinner, to recruit a Black player. Perry being a star player. There were many star players on that 66 Pearl High School team, but also the valedictorian, the school, being recruited by pretty much every good basketball program in the country. It made sense that Coach Skinner might approach Perry to become, the pioneering player in the SEC. The question is whether Perry wanted to do it or not. Initially he did not want to.
mentioned the fact that we're in this ongoing struggle now for, you can call it civil rights, you can call it diversity, equity, and inclusion. How does parents' life impact young readers? And the reason I'm asking you about young readers is because I think the book has been adapted for the younger reader. How does his life impact him from the
Yeah, so that was a turning point in my career is adapting the book for young readers. Now things like the play, at Nashville Children's Theater have happened, and the books I've written since then have all been for young readers. Also trying to use sports, which I think is accessible to kids, to introduce topics that are more important social topics. So I've had a chance to visit schools in 26 states now to talk about Perry. Very diverse range of schools, from the middle of a cow pasture in Wisconsin, to the middle of New York City, schools that are basically all white, schools that are basically all black. Elliot mentioned when you talk about when kids in second grade are learning about injustices, and kids have such a strong sense of what is right and what is wrong. And I think Perry's story illustrates that in so many ways, and so they can relate to that. Sadly, one of the things that young readers relate to, and Perry had this phrase he would use in life, he would say, we could all be treated in any one of three ways at any one time, maybe in the same day. You can be treated well by other people, you can be treated poorly by other people, or you cannot be treated at all. You can feel isolated and ignored. And often people expected Perry to say that the most difficult part of his pioneering experience was the being treated poorly. Traveling down to Starkville, Mississippi, or Oxford, and feeling like he might get shot and killed on the basketball court, or literally getting hit in the face and bleeding, and the referee's not calling a foul, and the crowd cheering. But he would say that the most difficult part of his experience was that third way, that not being treated at all, which was on his own campus at Vanderbilt for 4 long, lonely years, where he was excluded from much of the social life on campus, or no one would sit next to him in class. And so a lot of times young kids will come up, often African American students who are at a predominantly white school, and they will say that they can relate to that aspect of Perry's story. So it's a story that largely takes place in the 1960s, but unfortunately it's extremely relevant to a lot of kids today.
Yeah, and I want to mention that when Perry went to Vanderbilt in 1966, he was accompanied by Walter Murray, who was the salutatorian. They both went to Vanderbilt at the same time.
Right, and there's now dorms named after both of them on campus.
Right. I remember when I interviewed Perry for a small piece that I was writing, he talked about something like a purple man syndrome, where he really didn't fit in, and he would kind of seek refuge back in the African American community. I know that he would spend some time at Fisk University. He would spend some time at Tennessee State. It was like to let me get my bearings back over where people know me and understand me, but yet he also had that feeling when I interviewed him of the pressure that he felt from the African American community that he could not fail. He had to succeed. And I always thought, and we sort of talked about it a little bit, that's an awesome burden to carry. And in some ways, I can identify with that. You can't let your community down if you are in certain situations. You have to rise above whatever it may be, but yet you seek that place of solace where you can go and kind of be you. And so that was one of the experiences that he talked with me about.